welcome to the Marley Bird YouTube channel, brought to you by Red Heart Yarns. In this video, I will show you how to make the Asymmetrical Knit Shawl by Lisa Gentry. Lisa is a wonderful knitwear and crochet designer, and she didn't pull any punches when she designed this stunning piece, which uses the brand new yarn It's a Wrap by Red Heart Yarns. This yarn is a 50% acrylic, 50% cotton yarn, and it has 1,100 yards. 1,100 yards in this full ball. It's a 7-ounce ball or 200 gram. The color changes are not gradual. They do go from one to the next, but you get a really good variety of 3 different colors in each ball of yarn. You can check out more of this yarn and the details over on redheart.com. As for the pattern, it is free at redheart.com. I will put a link to the pattern and the materials in the video description box right down there below. And while you're down there, please smash that like button, as my kids say, to let people know you enjoyed this video. Once you have the pattern and the materials, join me back here. I'll walk you through everything you need to know to complete this pattern. I'll also give you a couple of tips on how to keep track of where you are in the actual pattern. Go ahead. Shawl patterns are popular in general, but asymmetrical shawl patterns are incredibly popular, and this one is no different. This shawl pattern uses size 2 needles, and I will recommend that you get some circular needles in order to accommodate the number of stitches you will have as you get towards the end of this shawl. For this lesson, I am actually going to show you how to do these stitches on some worsted weight yarn and size 8 needles. That way you can better see the stitches and see the way the stitches are created. But when you're working on your actual shawl, make sure you're using the It's a Wrap yarn and size 2 circular needles. Now let's take a look at the shawl itself. I'll move those needles out of the way. This shawl is asymmetrical, and it begins all the way down here with 5 little stitches. Then you work increases in order to get this really cool shape. And those increases are worked with garter stitch. Then you switch from garter stitch and you jump into stockinette, and then you go back to garter stitch, and then you do this section of lace. The instructions then have you continue on alternating these different sections depending on how the pattern is written, and you'll notice the color changes happen naturally because of the yarn. So as the yarn changes colors, you don't have to do anything different with the pattern because the pattern is written the way it's written, and so on and so forth. So for this pattern, you really need to know how to knit and purl, how to do some simple decreases and some simple increases. Let's go ahead and we will begin at the very start of the pattern down here with our 5 stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and move that out of the way. As I mentioned, I'm using a worsted weight yarn and size 8 knitting needles for this demonstration. Because the start of the shawl begins with garter stitch, I like to start all my garter stitch with the long tail cast on. For the long tail cast on, we need a slip knot on our needle to begin. Place the tail of the yarn in your hand, take the working yarn, wrap it around your forefinger and middle finger, and when you come back up, cross that over. Now rotate your hand over, go underneath the first loop, grab the back loop, and take that off. You now have a slip knot, and this slip knot can go ahead and be placed on your needle. Now we're only doing 5 stitches with this long tail cast on, so I don't have a really super long tail, but you do want to make sure your tail is long enough to accommodate the 5 stitches. You'll then put your tail around your thumb, working yarn around your finger, and you proceed with the long tail cast on. If you need detailed instructions for the long tail cast on, go ahead and click that I right there, and it'll take you to the instructions for the long tail cast on. Remember, your slip knot counts as a stitch, so if we want to put 5 stitches on here, we're only going to cast on an additional 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once you have those 5 stitches on there, you're ready to jump into row 1 of the pattern. Go ahead and place your needle in your left hand and pick up your right hand needle. You'll see that this is the right side of your work. If you wanted to use a stitch marker to indicate this is the right side, you absolutely could do that. I'll leave that up to you. You begin working on this side with an increase immediately. So we will do a knit front and back. You go into that stitch as if to knit, yarn over your right hand needle, come out the stitch, extend, and swivel around and go into the back leg of that same stitch. Yarn over your right hand needle, come out that stitch, and then let the stitch on your left hand needle jump off. We now have 2 stitches where we had 1. The next part of the instructions say to go ahead and knit to the last 2 stitches. So I will knit as regular to the last 2 stitches. I'm to my last 2 stitches, and now I will do a decrease by doing a knit 2 together. You do a knit 2 together by going into the second stitch from the needle and inserting your needle just like you would if you were going to knit into it, and you then insert it into the stitch that's closest to the tip of the needle. Yarn over your right hand needle, come out and off. So where we began with an increase, we ended with a decrease. So our stitch count never changed because we increased and then decreased. But what we've done is we've started to create this bias asymmetrical shape. Now we'll go ahead, put that needle into our left hand and continue on. So we are on a wrong side row, and on this wrong side row, we will only do an increase, not a decrease. So this is where our stitches are going to begin to expand and make the shawl bigger. We start off by knitting to the last stitch of the row. So we will go ahead and knit down to the last stitch of this row. You'll notice that it's also the stitch that we did our increase in before. This is the last stitch of our row, so we'll do our increase. Again, it's a knit front and back. So we knit to the front of that stitch, and then we knit in the back of that stitch and off. Because we did not do a decrease on that row, we now have 1 more stitch than we had in the previous row. So now we have 6. Looking at the instructions, you'll notice now that rows 3 through 52 are just a repeat of rows 1 and 2. You'll go ahead and repeat those 2 rows a total of 25 more times. Remember, every time you're on the right side, you will increase the first stitch, and then you will knit down to the last 2 stitches and work a decrease. By doing so, you're creating the really nice bias shaping. When you put your needle in your left hand and it's time to begin working on the wrong side, you will always knit down to the last stitch of the row and work your increase. And that's how you're going to begin to expand the number of stitches you get for the shawl. So this is my last stitch. I work my knit front and back, and now I have 7 stitches. And I'm up to 8 stitches on here, and I'm back to a right side row. Because you now know how to do this garter stitch section and the way you do the increases and decreases on the right side and just the increase on the wrong side, let's move on to what the next big section of this shawl is, which is stockinette. For rows 53 through 92, we're going to work in stockinette. When we're on our right side, once again, we will continue to do our knit front and back in this first stitch, and we will knit down to the last 2 stitches and do our knit 2 together. So this is not changing for this right side row. We're still creating this basic knit stitch here. Don't forget to do those last 2 stitches as knit 2 together, but we're getting that nice bias. As I turn my work now, because this is stockinette, what will happen here on row 54, I would go ahead and I would knit the first 4 stitches. So I would knit 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I would purl to the last 3 stitches. So I have just one stitch here, so I will go ahead and just purl one. And then the last 3 stitches, I knit 2. And then I knit front and back. So what I've done here is I have maintained a garter stitch edge, so that way when the stockinette is complete, it won't roll. But I've started working the stockinette section by simply doing that purl 1. Now that I've turned my work, I'm ready to continue on with rows 55 through 92. This is a continuation of the stockinette stitch section. So just like before, whenever I'm on my right side, I will begin with my knit front and back in this very first stitch, just like before. And then I will knit to the last 2 stitches. This has not changed from the garter stitch section. What will change is that we will now see stockinette in between garter stitch at the edges. When I turn my work, I'm beginning a row 54, so this would be my next row, and I would begin here by knitting 4. So I would knit 1, 2, 3, 4, and now I purl to the last 3 stitches. So I bring my yarn in front of the needles and I go ahead and purl to the last 3 stitches. To the last 3 stitches, I go ahead and I knit 2, and then I work a knit front and back. And what this is going to do, as I mentioned before, is give me a garter stitch around the stockinette stitch area right here that we are creating, so that way our edges will not roll. Let me work this through a couple more times, that way you can see how it looks on this bigger sample. Okay, so I've worked several rows here, so that way you can see what the right side of your fabric begins to look like. You can see down here I have some garter stitch. This is where I started off, and this is where I began working my stockinette stitch with the garter stitch along my edges. Can you see how that's working up? So that's how you work the stockinette stitch section through row 92. The next section is back to garter stitch. So you will work the garter stitch section through row 130. Once you're at the 130, 131 is where the lace stitch begins. So because I have enough stitches on my swatch here to work the lace stitch pattern, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the lace stitch pattern so you can see how to do that, because I don't think you need me to have all of those stitches on here to see it work. You just need to see how it works on the number of stitches it takes to make it happen. You'll notice at the end of the garter stitch section, you'll have a total of 70 stitches on your needle. Obviously, I don't have 70 stitches, but I have enough to get me through this section. The lace section will take you through rows 131 through rows 146. You begin by working the row 1 of the lace stitch section, and that part of the pattern, just so you can see, it's actually written right here where it says pattern stitch and it says lace pattern. This is the part you're going to follow. That's what we're getting ready to do now. So here we go. We start off with a knit front and back, just like we've been doing all along. And then we will knit down to the last 2 stitches, just like we've been doing all along. So you go ahead and get down to the last 2 stitches. Lace. All right, so there's my knit 2 together. I now will turn my work. Row 2 has us begin with a knit 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and I will purl to the last 3 stitches. This is familiar. We've been doing this all along, so we can do this pretty easily. The last stitch of this row is a knit front and back, just like we just finished learning, and I will turn my work. This is where the lace starts to happen, okay? And this is really important that we follow along and do our increases and decreases correctly, because our stitch count is not going to change on this row, but we are going to have a bunch of increases and decreases. They're just going to be partnered up, so that way the stitch count stays the same. Let me show you what I mean. For row 3, we start off with a knit front and back, just like we've been doing We're pretty used to that. This is old hat by this point. So we do our knit front and back and we jump off. Now we're going to knit 3. 1, 2, 3. You'll notice now in the pattern there's a star, and that star indicates the part where you are going to work your repeat. You have more stitches than I do on your needle, so that star is going to be more significant to you than for me because I'm just going to have to work through star once, where you have to do it a multiple of times. The pattern has a yarn over, so we bring our yarn from the back to the front, back to the back, and now we do an S2KP. So you will slip these 2 stitches as if to knit 2 together. So I'm going to go into both of them as if I'm knitting them together, and I slip them. Now I go ahead and I knit the next stitch. Now I'm going to take my left hand needle, grab those 2 stitches I just slipped, and have them jump up and over that 1 stitch I just knit. Now I do a yarn over. Once I've done that yarn over, I will knit 5. Once you've knit 5, you would repeat from star to the last 3 stitches. When you get to the last 3 stitches, you will knit 1 and knit 2 together to maintain the bias shaping and to finish off the right side of your work. And to my last 3 stitches, so I will knit 1 and then do my knit 2 together, and that will maintain my bias. And at the same time, I've already started to create my lace stitch pattern right there. I turn my work and I carry on with row 4. For row 4, you begin with a knit 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I will purl to the last 3 stitches. Really easy. We've already been doing this. This is just like when we were doing the stockinette stitch section, which makes sense because the lace is on a bed of stockinette. When you get to the last 3 stitches, you will knit 2 and then do a knit front and back. When you come to your yarn over, let me undo this one so you can see. When you come to your yarn over, it's going to look like a big hole on your needle. It looks like a string is just resting on your needle. That is perfectly normal. That's what you want. That is how you get the holes in your lace. So you will just purl it just like normal. Okay, so you purl just like normal. If I can get my purls to work here. There's my second yarn over. So I go in just like I'm going to purl, and I purl it. And I carry on. And I will do this to the last 2 stitches or the last 3 stitches of my row. Now I will knit 2 and then knit front and back. So I knit to the front of that stitch and then the back of that stitch and turn. Now I'm on row 5, which is really easy because it's just a basic row like we've been doing all along. I start off with an increase, I knit to the last 2 stitches, then I do a decrease. So here at the start, I will work with my knit front and back. And I don't do any lace on this row. I simply knit to the last 2 stitches and then do a knit 2 together. And then work my knit 2 together. What's really great is that row 6 and row 7 are just a repeat of row 4 and 5. So just like before, when we're on our right side, we'll start off with an increase and end with a decrease. And when we're on our wrong side, we want to make sure we maintain that garter stitch at the edges and stockinette in the center. Go ahead and complete row 6 and 7 and join me back here for row 8. Once you finish row 6 and 7, row 8 is just a repeat of row 4, meaning we're going to just increase our 1 stitch. So we'll do a knit front and back at the end of row 4, keeping those garter stitches along the edges. So I start off with my knit 4, and now I switch to my purls. So I will purl to the last 3 stitches. These last 3 stitches, I do my knit 2, and then my knit front and back. Row 9 is where we begin another lace row. You begin row 9 with a knit front and back. We're on the right side, remember? So we're going to do a knit front and back, and we will remember that we will end with the knit 2 together. The next part of the instructions have us knit 5. You'll notice here, this is where the star is again, so this indicates your repeat. You will yarn over your needle, slip both of those stitches as if knit 2 together, knit 1 stitch on your left-hand needle, and then have those 2 stitches you slipped jump up and over that stitch you just knit. Don't forget to do another yarn over after that, and you will knit 5. Once you've done that, you repeat from star to the last 4 stitches. When you get to the last 4 stitches, you want to go ahead and do a knit 2, and then a knit 2 together. I feel like by this point you should know how to do the lace. It's a simple combination of those 2 yarn overs and the slip 2 knit past slip stitch over. Remember, when you do that particular decrease, you will go into the 2 stitches on your left-hand needle as if to knit 2 together. Then you'll knit 1 more stitch from your left-hand needle, then pass the 2 stitches over that knit stitch. So you've ultimately decreased 2 stitches, and by doing the 2 yarn overs on either side of that decrease, you have not changed your stitch count. Pretty easy stuff, right? Now, because we know how to do all of these sections now, the garter stitch, the stockinette stitch, and the lace, the rest of the pattern is just a combination of those. And I want to show you what I've done to really help myself keep track of where I am in the pattern and exactly what it is I'm doing. Let me go ahead and pull in the actual pattern that I'm working off of. Now, this is the pattern that I downloaded from redheart.com, and you'll notice here that I have highlighted these sections in different colors. Garter stitch is in orange, stockinette is in yellow. This is garter stitch again, so it's orange. And then as I turn the page, we come to green, which is the lace section. Once you get past the lace section, it's just a repeat of all of these other sections we've already done. Okay, so knowing what we know here, let me see if I can do this. All right, knowing that we have orange as garter stitch, when I come over here and I see the next section is orange, I know I'm going to be working in garter stitch. Knowing that the yellow is stockinette stitch, when I look over here and I see yellow, I know that I'm doing stockinette stitch. The next is garter, the next is stockinette, the next is garter. Okay, you see that? Now I come to pink. What does pink mean? Pink actually is all of these rows together. Okay, so pink is where you would repeat rows 131 through 226. 131 starts back up here at lace. So once you get past this section of garter stitch that I have highlighted in orange, you then would repeat all of this again. So you would go lace, garter, stockinette, garter, stockinette, garter, and that would complete that one. Then we have another section of pink, so you would do all that again. Then we have another section of pink, so we do all that again. You see how this works? Then we get to stockinette, garter, lace, garter, stockinette. And then we're to purple. What does the purple mean? Well, let me tell you. So the purple is a combination of all of these rows right here. It's a combination of rows 461 through 488. So you would work through that repeat one more time. Do you have to use highlighter to keep track of all this? Absolutely not. But for me, it is so much easier for me to know what is going on if I highlight the sections. It's like a quick reminder of, oh, I don't have to go back and look at what rows 1 and 2 are, I know that's garter stitch. I don't have to go back and look at what rows 53 and 54 are. I know that that's stockinette. You see what I'm saying here? So by doing the highlighter method like this, just makes it so much easier for me to know what's coming up next on this beautiful shawl. And as I showed you before, this shawl is literally just a combination of all of these sections. Okay, so you don't have to highlight, but it makes it so much easier. Once you have worked through all of the sections, you then would bind off your stitches and then weave in your ends. Now what's really great is because this shawl is made up using just one ball of It's a Wrap, you should, in theory, only have 2 ends to weave in. The one you started with and the one you ended with. Now, of course, that's going to be different if there happened to be a knot in your yarn or you had to break it at some point for whatever reason and rejoin. But ultimately, it could be that you only have 2 ends to weave in. Super easy. As far as binding off, you're going to bind off just like normal. Nothing extra needs to go into your bind off. So let me show you how to do the bind off just as a refresher. Let's say this was the end of our work and we want to go ahead and bind off. So let's do that. All you will do to bind off is knit the first 2 stitches. I'm not doing an increase, I'm literally just knitting. Now I'll have that first stitch I knit jump up and over the second one and off. I'll knit 1 more stitch. So I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle. Have the back one jump up and over the front and off. Knit 1 more stitch. Back, jump up and over the front and off. And you would do this all the way down the row until all of the stitches are bound off. When you get to the last 2 stitches, go ahead and have the back one jump up and over the front one, and then you can go ahead and snip your yarn, leave at least 5 to 6 inches for a tail that you can weave in. And at this point, you literally can just pull that yarn, give it a good tug, and it's nice and secured and bound off. You then would go ahead, take your tail and weave it in along the back side or the wrong side of your work, and you would have a very nice complete shawl. Now, as I mentioned, this is an asymmetrical shawl. That's what the name is even called. And so the way you would wear this shawl is literally just draped around your neck. Hopefully this won't interfere with my microphone very much, but you can literally just swoop it around and have it just be nice and neat. It's just so pretty and it's so lightweight, so comfortable, perfect for any sort of spring or summer weather, or even just a slightly chilly fall day. It's just so pretty. This is just a really great yarn, a really great pattern by Lisa Gentry, and it's free over on redheart.com. Hopefully you have enjoyed this video and you will run out, pick up some beautiful It's a Wrap yarn, and get this free pattern to make this asymmetrical knit shawl. I'm Marley Bird, proud spokesperson for Red Heart Yarns, and I hope that I have helped you along the way to make this fantastic shawl. Thanks so much. Bye. Everything you need to know about knitting or crochet can be found right here on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. Learn with Marley Bird. Visit youtube.com/Marley Bird.